10-year-old boy lost in the wilderness is forced to do the unimaginable to survive. As old as it is, camping is still a popular activity that the whole family can enjoy. Spending a few days in the woods is not only a literal breath of fresh air, but it also means you can go fishing, hiking, and even roast your own gooey s'mores. Of course, that doesn't mean it comes without its own risks. While camping can be a lot of fun, it can also be dangerous. There are so many unforeseeable things that could go wrong in the wilderness, and one poor family learned that firsthand. Despite what you might expect, their story will definitely inspire you. In the summer of 2015, the Bradley family decided to spend time together doing something they loved, camping. So they packed up and headed out into the high Uintas wilderness in Utah for an enjoyable trip. Little did they realize, though, it would be anything but. If you have not done so already, please subscribe to our channel and click that notification bell to get inspired by these real-life stories every day. Now, back to the story. The Bradleys' first morning was an eventful one. They hiked to a nearby lake in the hopes of catching that night's dinner. Unfortunately, only 10-year-old Malachi was able to hook anything. The family was disappointed that they wouldn't have much of a dinner, but Malachi had a plan. He snuck off into the woods to forage for mushrooms to complement the fish he caught. But he ventured too far and before long realized he was totally lost. Meanwhile, back at camp, Malachi's family began to worry. It wasn't like the boy to wander off. They were all beginning to suspect that the worst had happened, but they tried to keep their spirits up. They waited for 30 minutes before they realized what they had to do. After half an hour with no sign of Malachi, his father knew it was time to act. He walked back to the parking lot to call 911. Unfortunately, he had no signal, so he had to drive a couple of miles until he was able to use his phone. Meanwhile, in the woods, Malachi found himself completely turned around. He planned to walk toward the highway with the hopes of flagging down a car, but he ended up wandering deeper into the dark woods. It took mere minutes after Malachi's father made his panicked phone call for a search to get underway. Hundreds of people set off to look for the boy. There was even a helicopter tasked with flying over the woods to try and locate him. Even with all this manpower, the sun had set, and Malachi still hadn't been located. His mother, Molly, refused to leave the campsite until her boy was safe in her arms. She was terrified that he was gone forever. Back in the woods, Malachi was doing his best to survive. He managed to find clean drinking water from a river that ran through the forest, but his attempts to catch fish using a handmade spear didn't work. Malachi's family didn't want him to feel alone, so they spent the night at the campsite, making sure that they left the campfire burning all night. They hoped that he would spot it in the dark. With the sun long gone, it was crucial that Malachi find a way to stay warm in the frigid forest. He came across some boulders that were still warm from the sun's heat, and using his t-shirt to cover his legs, snuggled up inside of his coat as best he could. Unbeknownst to the family, Malachi had survived through the night and continued trying to get back to safety. Meanwhile, the search for Malachi continued that morning. The helicopters overhead began using loudspeakers in order to reach him. This time, Malachi heard the helicopters, but he was in a heavily wooded area with no chance of being spotted. Thinking quickly, Malachi raced out to a clearing. Would the rescue team be able to spot him from above? It was a clever plan, and it paid off. After a terrifying night in the wilderness, Malachi was spotted by the helicopter team, who was able to lift him from the clearing. Then they rushed back to the campsite, where he was reunited with his teary and thankful family. It took more than 30 hours, but Malachi was finally safe and sound. His mother was in a state of total shock. She'd begun to suspect the worst. "I was worried that this was going to be all over and be a tragedy," she later admitted to reporters. After making sure he was healthy and safe, Malachi's family learned about his night in the wilderness. He'd actually trekked more than 5 miles away from the campsite. Not only that, but he'd crossed a massive river, a steep ravine, and a huge hill in the process. "It was weird not having anybody with me, but I just kept going. I knew I had to make it back or my family would be really sad," said Malachi later to a reporter from USA Today. Amazingly, Malachi credits his survival to a game he played just weeks before. To prepare for their camping trip, his father had led him through a list of what to do should he ever become lost. Of course, when Malachi's father gave him that lesson, he never intended for his son to actually have to use the skills he was being taught. But thank goodness he ran him through that exercise. Although he was proud of having survived the night in the woods, Malachi learned a valuable lesson in the process. "I definitely won't do that again," he said about wandering off into the woods alone. Malachi's vow not to venture off into the wild by himself is a positive takeaway from a situation that barely skirted disaster. But any wise woodsman knows that just because you're not alone doesn't mean that you've eliminated any risk of danger. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up and consider sharing it with someone who may find it interesting. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.